All right, can everyone hear us okay? I mean, obviously you can hear okay. There's also folks on Zoom that you can't see or hear, but they are here as well. So just some housekeeping things before we get started. So the bathrooms are out in the lobby. So if you go out to the lobby and towards where you came in from the parking lot, they're often like a little alcove there in the lobby. We're going to be closing the door here in a couple of seconds. If you do have to leave, just try to do so without disturbing your neighbors. It's funny that I'm saying this because currently we only have one person here, but more people should be trickling in soon. So don't disturb any of your invisible neighbors, or I suppose if you're home on Zoom, you can disturb whoever you like. So we'll get started in just a minute here. So this series of programs that we're doing is called Neighbors Together. We're doing it to promote Literacy DuPage, which is a local organization that teaches English to adults. And we're trying to highlight the diversity of DuPage County, which the Immigrants exhibit did a really good job of doing. So Literacy DuPage recruits and trains volunteer tutors who teach English to DuPage County adults. They've been around since 1972, equipping a big-hearted army of tutors to work side by side with adults who want to learn English or improve their comprehension, speaking, reading, or writing. So please consider volunteering or learning more if you're interested. I'm going to show a short video, literally very short, 30 seconds, about volunteering with Literacy DuPage. And we also have some handouts in the back of the room and on Zoom. So bear with me here while I share this. Let's see.
Literacy DuPage is a community-based nonprofit formed in 1972. Our mission: to provide accessible and customized tutoring to adults in DuPage County and help them in English with their reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills.
It's much more than just I know how to speak English so I can teach English. Tutors have empathy. There's a degree of compassion. To work with adults is really special.
Volunteer for Literacy DuPage today and become a tutor.
See, I wasn't kidding. That really was very short. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over now to Dave Oberg, who was kind enough to come from the Elmhurst History Museum to talk about a really cool exhibit around immigrants in DuPage County that happened at History Museum a while ago. So bear with me. I'm just going to get his PowerPoint up here. Let's see. All right. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Thanks so much. Here you go.
All right. Well, very happy to be here today. If you're on Zoom, if you want to use the chat and wave or something, let me know you're there. I think that'll be fun. We're going to do a little recap today about an exhibit we began in October of 2022 and rolled into the spring of 2023 called In Pursuit of Happiness, Immigrants in Our Communities. It really was an absolute labor of love. It was a terrific exhibit, and I'm really proud of the team that put this together. We're going to share a little bit about why we created the exhibit. We're going to share a little bit about the evolution of immigration in the United States as part of the storyline, and then I'm going to share some personal stories from some of our immigrants. We're focusing particularly on the post-World War II period with the last part of my program. Because we found we had a real dearth of stories in our collection when we began the process 2 years ago. And I have to say now it is overflowing, and that's the way it should be. It is very near and dear to my heart as well. My wife Sonali's parents came to the United States from India in 1969. And as I listened to a lot of the interviews and we were sharing some of the stories, I'm like, this all sounds very familiar to me. There are a lot of parallel stories here and definitely a lot of fun here. So I want to do, let's see, slideshow from beginning here, right? We go. Okay. So you should be able to see full slide there, right there. So just to kind of frame this a little bit, the United States is home to over 40 million immigrants, more still than any other nation on the face of the planet. President Kennedy.
That was my fault.
Yep. All I know is that when you have the historian do your tech support, you're really in trouble. I'm an excellent telegrapher, but that doesn't come in as much handy in the 21st century, probably. Okay, there we go. All right. So as I said, the United States is home to more than 40 million immigrants today, more than any other country in the world. President Kennedy described our country as a nation of immigrants and even authored a book under that title. And in our area, Chicago is still a very strong magnet for immigrants. And the suburbs, I should say as well, are increasingly home to a larger foreign-born population as job opportunities have expanded, especially around the I-88 tech corridor, making this a real draw for people from all over the world. Our recent exhibit, In Pursuit of Happiness, Immigrants in Our Communities, tried to explore the changing face of immigration in the western suburbs, using original stories, images, and artifacts from immigrants to personalize the history of immigration. As I said, a nation of immigrants. So the impetus for this exhibit came from two different factors. One is in 2019, we sat down with a number of educators and talked about, if we're going to run some exhibits, particularly in the fall, winter, and spring, where are some areas in the curriculum where you really need help with state and local curriculum standards and teaching guidelines? And they identified immigration as definitely one of those topics that they could use a lot of help with. At the same time, we did an internal audit, our team did, and we noticed that while we had done a very good job of telling the story of immigration in the 19th century and the early 20th century, we had just this cavernous hole in our collection of stories and artifacts and photographs in the post-World War II environment. And, I'm of an age where I say, well, post-World War II, that's not that many years. Well, no, it's about 80 now. That's a lot of time to fill. And so we recognized this was going to be a pretty heavy lift for us to fill that gap. And so over the next 2 years, we really worked to address that topic and to really talk about all the sweeping changes to immigration policy that happened in the post-war period, how the Elmhurst and the western suburbs changed during that time period. And so we partnered with Sandy Denninger, who is a longtime Elmhurst History Museum volunteer and wonderful museum professional, to kind of seek out stories and artifacts and help us connect with some of the local organizations that can help us find additional individuals to share their stories and foster a number of different connections there. So a major thrust of the new exhibit was going to be sharing immigrant stories in their own words. We wanted to put human faces to the exhibit. And so we lined up a series of oral histories, which we videotaped and conducted with Sandy Denninger and our curator of collections, Dan Lalonde. And as I said, the idea was to give kind of a personal face to all of this and to really make it relatable and do this on a human scale. In addition, Sandy Denninger and our supervisor of education services, Jess Wandersee, built a number of bridges to immigration-related organizations in DuPage County and beyond, including Immigrant Solidarity DuPage, the Jilin Foundation, the International Club at York High School. And you can see just a short listing of some of the museums and different cultural partners that we engaged in this project to really give it some meat. They also served as very important partners for a variety of different programs that we designed around the exhibit to amplify its message. And then Denninger worked with our former curator of exhibits, Dan Bartlett, to install a very meaningful, colorful exhibit full of rich history, important artifacts, and a really compelling storyline that resonated well with our visitors. So the exhibit opened October 28th, ran through May 15th, a little longer than we typically run an exhibit, but they gave us a lot of time for teachers and students to book field trips and experience the exhibit. The longer timeline let us connect with a lot of adult and senior groups that also toured the exhibit, and it let us create a just robust and compelling lineup of supporting programs that addressed a lot of different audiences and learning styles. And a lot of great partners on this. And you're seeing images of just two of those. First, we worked with Immigrant Solidarity DuPage, and we did an incredible Dia de los Muertos event at the museum. And then we also, if you see the picture of all the smiling people and the huge crowd behind them, that's actually right here in Elmhurst at Hammersmith Chapel. We partnered with Elmhurst University And we brought in the Chicago Immigrant Orchestra, and this is an amazing group. They actually all play on instruments native to their countries, a variety of music, and they play each other's songs as well. And I've been in the museum business more than 30 years, and I have to say it's one of the most compelling and just rich and wonderful programs I've seen in my entire career. So just give you a little bit of an idea. This is the lineup of our fall and winter programs. Everything from a sneak preview for the people who helped us create the exhibit to our Day of the Dead celebration. We worked with the library as well, both working with Nestor Gomez on Immigration Stories Showcase, and we partnered with them on a book discussion on a book called American Like Me, Reflections on Life Between Cultures. That was edited by America Ferrera with a number of different people from all over the world contributing their stories. A wonderful gallery talk, a number of very colorful lectures. We also were at the Brew Point Craft in Elmhurst doing a cultural connections through coffee. One of the stories that comes out again and again, and a story I'm going to share near the end, is how coffee in particular becomes this binding agent that brings people together, and it comes up again and again and again in storylines. Our spring lineup included that Chicago Immigrant Orchestra, some fun family workshops as well, immigrant story time, and a screening of the movie The Namesake, which I have to say makes me cry my eyes out every single time I watch it, and the book is even better, by the way. And closing with a cultural crossroads celebration, which we partnered with Immigrant Solidarity DuPage, the Gielan Association, and the York High School International Club on. So let's talk a little bit. Let's about some of the storyline in the exhibit itself, and I'll just share with you a little bit about what we went into. First and foremost, let's talk about the history of immigration in the United States. It's never followed a really clear and linear path, nor has the path to citizenship. The Constitution notes at the beginning just a little bit about what a natural-born citizen is and what the requirements are to be president. And then the first Congress establishes in 1790 a criteria for foreign-born individuals to become U.S. citizens. Those criteria are very, very narrow and very, very troubling. Unless you're a white male born in Europe that comes over here and lives, there's really no path to citizenship for you in that first early definition. That's going to change dramatically with the passage of the 14th Amendment in the wake of the Civil War in 1868, which clearly defines citizenship, noting all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside, and are granted equal protection under the law. So we see a much broader interpretation in the wake of the Civil War. So let's talk a little bit about, as we look at immigration in those first years of settlement in our area, in DuPage County, let's talk about where people are coming from, and it's going to change a lot over time as I get closer to the future. Our original immigrant population largely reflects broader trends in the United States. In the 1840s, 1850s, 60s, and even 70s, immigrants in this area were mostly Europeans from England, Germany, Ireland, and Sweden. Our earliest arrivals filled jobs locally, and they were attracted by the Illinois and Michigan Canal, the railroad industry, mining industry, or farming in this area. Elmhurst itself, oh, let me back that up again. That's, can I page up to get back to that? I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay. This is kind of funny, actually. So if you look at Elmhurst itself, actually, we see a large influx of German immigrants in Elmhurst and DuPage County, and a lot of other counties in Illinois in the 1840s and through the 70s. And this is no accident. There's a failed revolution in Germany in 1848. There was an attempt to create a constitutional monarchy and to weld a bunch of these German-speaking states together into some kind of greater Germany. It fails. There are winners and losers in that revolution, and a lot of people come here in the wake of that. There are, again, wars of German unification in the 1860s and again 1870, which spawns another massive outpour of immigrants in the from the German states. If you were to visit Elmhurst in the mid to late 19th century, I'm not exaggerating to say it would be a toss of the coin whether the person you ran into on the street spoke English or German as their primary language. And we have some evidence of that. We even have a poster in the museum collection, which is advertising a Christmas show, Bring the Kids Down to Schwass's Tavern. It's written in English and German both, for free gifts, a pantomime show, and a really, really violent puppet show. Would have been, sort of, think about sort of the German equivalent of watching the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote or something like that, actually. So that's kind of what we see. As a matter of fact, if you went to what we now call Elmhurst University, which was Melanchthon Pro Seminary back then, the instruction was exclusively in German at that time, and that wouldn't change entirely until the post-World War I era. So in the 1880s, 90s, and early 20th century, there's a new wave of immigrants coming to the United States and to our area as well. And a lot of them are coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. There's a very strong contingent of Italian, Polish, Russian, and Balkan immigrants coming to Chicago, and they're working jobs in the city's steel and meatpacking plants. And a lot of these newer immigrants are coming from more rural regions. There are a lot less opportunities for skilled labor. And because of that, they face a lot of discrimination when they come here. And in response to that, they form very tight communities, and in Chicago, strong ethnic neighborhoods to preserve their customs. And we still see some vestiges of those ethnic neighborhoods if we go to the city to this very day. Now, those same immigrant communities, after establishing footholds in the city, begin relocating to Elmhurst and the western suburbs a few decades later. And in the Elmhurst area, a lot of them are seeing job opportunities. And we get a lot of immigrants from Italy, Greece, and Slovenia in our area, and a lot of them are working at the quarry here in Elmhurst, Elmhurst Chicago Stone Company, and in the construction industry here as well. Now, in all, during this span, more than 20 million immigrants between 1880 and about 1920 come into this area. And this is a period of rapid industrialization and urbanization. The growth of the immigrant populations within DuPage County largely mirrors Chicago. We get a lot of the push-pull factors we see, just like we do in Chicago. Push factors being war, poverty, and persecution, driving populations from their original homes, and the pull factors bringing them here, jobs, freedom, the promise for better life, luring them to our area. But regardless of how well they may have been accepted in their new communities, every ethnic group made some long-lasting impacts that really change with the influx of newer groups that take their places. The 1860s and 70s also see a tremendous influx of immigrants from China, many recruited to work specifically in the railroad and mining industries. But despite that active recruitment by employers, there are a lot of fears fueled by prejudice, racism, and competition for jobs, which results in Congress passing the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This law prohibits immigration of laborers from China and prevents all Chinese immigrants already here from becoming citizens. This will have the force of law until the middle of World War II, when China is an ally to the United States. And even then, immigration from China is restricted to only a few hundred people a year until the post-war period. Then things will change very dramatically, and for a variety of reasons I'm going to talk about. Anti-immigrant sentiment was not limited to the Chinese, and many immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe are going to be greeted with extreme prejudice. And a lot of these immigrants are going to pass through Ellis Island, which is established as an immigration station in 1892. Ellis Island becomes known as the largest port of entry to the United States and is nicknamed the Golden Door for those who are granted entry. But those stricter laws and the desire to deport undesirables give it another nickname, which is the Isle of Tears. Italian immigrants found themselves particularly vilified in the Chicago press and in Chicago newspapers, often portrayed as criminals and paupers, and many of them encounter employment and housing discrimination, and that contributes them to create these really tight-knit enclaves for mutual support, the rise of Italian grocery stores and produce markets, and a sizable population of Italian immigrants are going to work within Chicago's fruit and vegetable trade at the Southwater Street Market. That's where you're seeing in this particular period picture in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, a lot of Polish immigrants, including children, are going to fill jobs in the Chicago meatpacking houses. And then DuPage County sees a large influx during this time period of Czech immigrants, many of whom work for Western Electric and Cicero, and a lot of them live just next door in Berwyn, creating a number of tight-knit Czech cultural organizations to the suburbs as well. Now, in the years leading up to World War I in 1914, there are a large number of Southern and Eastern European immigrants that continue to come to the United States, but there are a lot of people in this country who see their customs and religions as foreign and threatening in some way, shape, or form. And there's also anti-German sentiment that gets stirred up during World War I as well. And during this period, German immigrants and American-born citizens who have German ancestry are often targeted. This is when you see a lot of people changing their names from German-sounding names to more American-sounding names. This is a lot of times when you see German language church services go away in a lot of the suburban communities. Although Elmhurst has such a strong German contingent, that survives World War I, and it's only World War II where you see it completely disappear in this part of the country. So, as the First World War rages on, the United States Congress takes efforts to tighten requirements for immigration. They enact a literacy test in 1917, but that's not keeping out as many immigrants as some of the people in Congress want at that time. And so they create what I consider the low water mark in American history, the National Origins Act of 1924, which puts a quota system in place to restrict numbers. And the National Origins Act slashes the number of Italian, Greek, and Eastern European immigrants that could not come here. We already have the Chinese Exclusion Act in force, too, on top of that. And we have a quota system based on, basically, they look back to the 1890 census when not a lot of people were coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they're saying you can only have a certain percentage based on those numbers from the 1890s. And we see very few people coming over in that particular time period. Those entry restrictions are not going to be completely eliminated until 1965. Now, as a result of those new quota laws, undocumented immigration, if you can't come here legally, we're going to find other means to come here, becomes an issue. And Congress creates, almost 100 years ago, for the first time, the United States Border Patrol in 1924. With those deep restrictions and quotas for immigration from overseas, now we are looking for another labor force. And so we see between the period of 1910 and 1930, a large migration and immigration of Mexican immigrants coming into this area to fill those jobs that, still need people to work them in one way, shape, or form. We see, again, we're not seeing people coming from Eastern and Southern Europe. We're not seeing people coming here from China. And so folks are coming here from south of the border, and they're working in the mining and the railroad industries and a number of other industries here. But the railroad in particular is attracting a number of Mexican immigrants and migrant workers to this area. And railroad employers, to reduce costs, create boxcar communities. And we have 3 of them not terribly far from here that were created. Bensonville has one, Aurora has one, and Elgin also, actually, or West Chicago rather, has one as well. And basically, they convert boxcars into small dwellings. They're very dangerously close to the train tracks, but they become the first foothold for a lot of these immigrants coming to this area to work and to live. And I actually have from the exhibit, we had a story from a Greek immigrant, actually, John Panagiotaros, who recalls one of the boxcar towns in Bensonville, and I'm going to quote him. "We came to Bensonville in 1930 when I was 12 years old. I think I was the only Greek in town, and there were only German boys. There were Mexicans who worked on the railroad as gandy dancers living in a camp down on Green Street. They weren't allowed to go uptown. They kept them down on the railroad property. They were the only boys that would play with me." So he found acceptance there. So the severe tightening of immigration during and after World War I also spurred another dramatic migration in the United States to our area in the 1910s and 20s and beyond. To fill the need for labor previously reserved from immigrants, almost 1 million African Americans from the rural South moved to urban centers like Chicago, as well as industrial cities in DuPage and Kane counties like Aurora and Elgin between 1917 and 1920, attracted by better paying jobs in factories. 1 million more would relocate in the decades to follow as well. This is known as the Great Migration. African Americans come north for a lot of reasons, same reasons that immigrants are coming from around the world. They're looking for economic opportunity, lives with fewer restrictions, and to join family members who are already here. They often struggle to build a new life in their unfamiliar environment, not unlike a lot of the immigrants we were talking about earlier, but they have the added handicap of very strong racial prejudice greeting them as well. They are able to create vibrant communities and culture in the city of Chicago, but in a lot of the suburbs, they're running into written and unwritten covenants which forbid them from having homes in the community. And if you come to the museum, I can show you a couple of examples of those that we actually have in our collection as well. So, the 1943 repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, I referred to that earlier, and then the communist takeover in 1949 in China results in a steady population growth from China coming into the United States and the beginning of easing on immigration restrictions. The door is going to open further in the post-World War II environment, first with the creation of the War Brides Act. As we have GIs and far-flung bases around the world, young people do what young people always do. They fall in love, they get married, they start families. We need a way to keep those families together. And so between 1945 and some revisions to the law in 1947, we eliminate prohibitions against Asian immigrants coming to our country that were spelled out of the National Origins Act of 1924, and we're seeing the door open. It's going to open further with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which now is giving preference for skilled immigrants and people with relatives already in this country. Quota numbers are adjusted upwards, and we're looking more at family reunification, and we're seeing more Asian and non-Western European immigrants coming into our country as well during this period. Against that backdrop, we're beginning to see something interesting happening here in the suburbs. First, in 1947, with the opening of Argonne National Laboratory, we're planting the seeds for what's going to become this powerful I-88 tech corridor that's going to be very attractive for immigrants from all over the world and make this a very desirable place to come and to work. And so we're seeing more foreign-born scientists coming here to work and to live. And for the first time, we're seeing a different pattern emerging as well. It used to be very often immigrants would come to this country and they would find jobs in the big cities and the factories, and then eventually they would migrate out to the suburbs. Now we're coming directly to the suburbs. A lot of these immigrants are still facing strong prejudice, however, in the late 1940s and 1950s. And one of the responses to that, and it's really a very powerful story, is the creation of the York Center Community Cooperative neighborhood in Lombard, which is a rare and welcoming antidote to some of the prejudice that's being experienced. In 1947, again, amidst very severe housing discrimination, it's a progressive idea to establish it's a multi-ethnic cooperative suburban neighborhood is born. Residents included African-American, Japanese, and Jewish families. Enduring friendships in that co-op crush the racial and religious barriers existing just outside the neighborhood. And the co-op is actually not dissolved until 2010. It's a really interesting history. Our friends at Lombard Historical Society did a really interesting documentary on this not terribly long ago, which I do very, very highly recommend. It's quite interesting, actually. So by 1960, DuPage County's population isn't quite what we expect today. It's about a third of the size of ours. And though it may be hard to believe, we still have large parts of our county that are still farmland. And again, to meet labor needs on suburban farms, we see again another significant wave of Mexican-American migrant workers and Mexican immigrant workers coming up here to work on the farms in our area at this time. Meanwhile, we're seeing these suburban industrial facilities and expressways are growing, the tech corridor is growing, and then things shift dramatically with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which is a crucial turning point in ending the discriminatory practices of the 1924 national quota system. And again, strong preference on family members rejoining other members in this country. The law also establishes preference for people with occupational skills or wanting training to learn new skills coming here. This is, by the way, shortly after this act is when my mother-in-law and father-in-law came to the United States as well, actually. This opens the door for the first influx of Asian Indians to the DuPage County area, actually. We see that population growing quite a bit. And in the western suburbs, a lot of these folks are moving right into the suburban communities, as I said, not stopping in Chicago first as professionals, and they're taking jobs in science and medicine and technology fields. And as the family members of immigrants journey and join their families, these populations increase, especially in Naperville, Oak Brook, Hoffman Estates. Thousands of foreign-born workers fill jobs in DuPage County and are expanding tech corridor, and the western suburbs are becoming much more diverse. Fermilab is going to lend its esteem to this as well, opening in nearby Batavia in 1967. And as that happens, there are a number of organizations that are emerged to help foreign-born scientists and their families transition to their new environment and their new home. And so they create a series of cross-cultural exchanges that start with coffee socials and children's play groups. And then in 1972, they introduced this cultural performance series in the auditorium, which is a tradition that still exists to this very day. And I highly recommend it. Fermilab is just down the road. You got to check it out if you haven't been there before. It's really a absolutely magnificent place. Now, we have a tie to Literacy DuPage, actually, as part of the exhibit, actually. Inspired by the need to address changing demographics, Literacy DuPage begins offering services to adult residents in 1972, and they serve a number of immigrants, and their students currently represent 36 different languages and 58 different countries. They were celebrating their 50th anniversary just as we opened the exhibit, which I thought was a really nice little piece of synergy here. So diversity in the western suburbs has accelerated over the last 20 years as immigrants have come to the suburbs for jobs and to raise American-born generations and reunite family. Populations in Muslim communities and those who trace their origins back to Mexico, Poland, India, and China have probably gained the most in DuPage County. These residents responded with both support and trepidation when laws were passed to combat terrorism after 9/11 and to control undocumented populations as well. Now, compared with surrounding suburbs, Elmhurst is maybe a little less diverse than some of our surrounding communities, but that is shifting and changing again. If you look at the 2020 census, you can see there's definitely a strong change, and we expect to see continued diversity growing here. Our excellent schools, our convenient location, and a lot of the amenities we have here are attracting immigrants, especially from Mexico, India, and the Philippines in recent years. But our steep home prices and a little bit of less pre-existing diversity has dissuaded some new residents. But again, that is changing, and it's changing pretty quickly and pretty dramatically. And I can tell you, if you look at Elmhurst School District 205, currently we have 50 languages spoken in our school district. The most frequently spoken include Spanish, various Indian dialects, Polish, and Greek, and the number of English language learners has really grown tremendously in the last 8 years, with recent growth in the number of Guatemalan and Polish students in particular, and more recently Ukrainian as well. We had quite a few Ukrainian students touring the exhibit, actually, who were recent arrivals here. I will say, as diversity has increased in Elmhurst and the western suburbs, we've seen the growth of a number of different support networks and cultural organizations to help preserve and share and celebrate cultures. You're seeing two here. You're seeing the Lantern Festival from the Jilin Foundation, which started in 1989 and was a very strong partner with us on the exhibit. They teach the Chinese language, provide social and health services to adults and seniors, and cultural enrichment. And they've opened a center in Naperville in 2003 as well, and keep expanding their programming quite a bit. There's also been very strong growth in Islamic education centers, mosques, and stores in the area as well. By the late 70s, a few mosques and schools opened in DuPage County to serve the growing number of suburban South Asian, Arab, and African-American Muslims. And in the last 20 years, we've been seeing very strong growth, particularly in Villa Park, Lombard, and Naperville nearby. A lot of our suburban Muslims are American-born, and according to the Pew Research Center, Illinois is the state with the highest Muslim concentration. Now, the strong growth in Naperville's Indian population has led to the creation of an Indian independence celebration. That's the other photo that you see celebrated here in this particular image, which began in 2015, in less than a decade, has become now the largest Indian American festival in the United States. That's very, very strong growth. So among the stories reflected in our immigration exhibit were stories of refugees from a number of crises in the post-war period. And we're going to tee up our first video here, I think, on this one. We shared a number of different stories from people who call this area home. And the first one is from Bích Thuy Lee, and it's her story of coming here with her family from Saigon in 1975.
Bear with me here. I'm just going to get the video shared. Let's see. Where did it go?
Whoa.
Here, I'll let you hit the space bar whenever you're ready to start it.
All right, so we're going to set this up. So she's going to share with you, she was 5 years old, mind you, when her family left Saigon in 1975. And, at first it was, we're going on an adventure. That was kind of the story. And then she starts to realize how serious this really is. That's how I'm going to set it up.
It started out with something that I thought was going to be fun, because my father, every once in a while, he would go into the city itself and he would take us along. It's always been a great trip, right? It's a grand trip and something that's different and new and exciting. So when he talked about having to go on this huge trip, I thought it was one of those. And I remember asking my parents, oh, can we please come along? And my father would say, yes, of course you're going to come along. And I distinctly remember my sister and I were jumping up and down for joy. We were holding hands and just like literally jumping up and down like little girls would, getting all excited, like, oh yeah, we're coming along. But what I didn't understand at that time, I thought it was kind of strange that as we were going from relatives to relatives, why were I couldn't understand why people were crying. Right? They were saying our goodbyes and giving the hugs, and I couldn't understand why they were giving us so much money and saying goodbye. That I didn't realize what was going on. I also remember my mother, in order to prepare for the trip, made this giant bag that we're supposed to fit all of our clothes into it, as well as making some preserves like meat, the salted preserved meat that you can usually see in a voyage, along with some of the other food to like carry us over. And I didn't understand it at the time, but that's what was going on. And the night that we were leaving, my parents being so anxious, and they were looking at the weather and they were praying that a miracle would happen or something would happen, because apparently what was going on is that later on I found out that they were trying to sneak out, because if it was one of those situations that if we were to get caught, then we would have been either shot on sight or sent to concentration camp. My father would have been shot on sight as a civil servant, and the rest of us will either be shot or sent to, like re-education camp. And I heard a lot of what I thought was firecrackers then, right? There was a lot of banging and popping sound, and I thought it was just firecrackers. But then I can start to notice that there were a lot of tenseness, a lot of people running scared, and then I can see like the whole light up, backdrop where the whole sky lit up. And I can see silhouettes of people just running back and forth and making all sorts of noise and getting scared and all of that. And now, as an adult, I realize that those were actually gunshots and fires and bombs and things like that was going on that lit up the whole sky. And it's not firecrackers, as I thought. I wouldn't have been scared if it wasn't for the fact that I can feel my parents were scared, everybody else around, and it was not what it seems to be.
Very powerful, powerful story, I have to say. It might be easier if I do the other videos. What do you think? And then I'll come back to the other
That's perfect.
I want to share. I think it'll be a little more fun, maybe.
I think it'll be more smooth. Yeah.
Yeah, more smooth. So one of the things that really came out when we did a number of interviews with our immigrants who came here to Elmhurst and DuPage County, one of them was the kind of the wonder of experiencing something new for the first time, something that had not been experienced in their home country. And my favorite one, and I actually look at snow in a different way thanks to this interview. Jose Mehta, who came to the United States from India, shared with us his first experience of a snowfall here in the United States. And as he set up the story, he was like, you don't understand. I had never seen snow. It never snowed where I came from at all. The only time I'd seen snow was in a movie. And then here I am suddenly experiencing snow for the first time. And I'm going to let him tell his story in his own words, I think, then. All right. Am I gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
When I came here, it was like the beginning of fall. And everybody kept talking about wait till summer. And I was like, what's the big deal about summer? But the first time it snowed, I had never seen snow before. I mean, not in reality. You'd seen it in movies and stuff like that. But when I first saw snow, I thought I was in heaven. It was just beautiful, so pretty. I still feel like that. People call me stupid about that, but people, especially living here in the cold weather, they hate it. I don't know why they live here then, but I still feel like it's beautiful, calm, serene, peaceful. Everything is so pure, you know. But that was my first impression, and I remember it snowed that first time I went for a walk, and we used to live in Hickory Hills area. There's a lot of forest preserves there. I went for a walk. I did not come back for 4 hours, and like all these people are stopping and asking if I needed a ride, and I was like, why would I need a ride? I'm enjoying this weather. And they probably thought, who's this weird guy walking in the middle of winter and doesn't want to ride?
I always look at snow in a different way now after that. I really do. It gives you an appreciation. One of the other things that came out is, you know, sometimes there's a little bitter and there's a little sweet when you come to a new place. And Anna Lazik, who is one of our police officers here in Elmhurst, shared with us an experience she had at Baker Square where there was some delight and then there was some hesitation as well about, oh, what have I got myself into? And I absolutely love this story.
It was October 11th, almost midnight, when we went to, I landed and he took me to Baker Square in LaGrange. And I drink black coffee, and I remember trying apple pie and French silk pie, and I was in love. I was like, oh, this is the best thing ever. And then I ordered coffee. And I tried it, and I was like, what is this? And it was plain black coffee, no sugar, Baker Square coffee. And I was like, I think I'm gonna go back. So he was like, calm down, it's okay. There is Serbian coffee here. You'll be able to find it and to buy it. So what I brought with myself is a little pot that we use to boil the water to cook coffee, and a little manual coffee grinder. So that was two things that I brought with me, because for real, that was a deal breaker for me. Like, I need that, and I still drink that. First thing after the Baker Square to fix my bad mood, I guess, he took me to Walmart. We don't have anything like that back home. Even today, I miss that, because when I was in Serbia last month, I had to buy medicine. I have to go to pharmacy. I have to buy shoes. I need to go to one store. I have to buy food. I need to go to the different store. So I was like, I miss Walmart. Everything is in one spot. So he took me, and mind you, it was October, so Halloween, so all the candies. And I bought 5 pounds of M&Ms with peanuts, and I was eating them for like 3 weeks, and then I didn't eat M&Ms for like 2 years. But yeah, that was all the small things that you guys see every day. To me, I was like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like the 5 pounds of M&M peanuts. I mean, that's, to me, that was like unbelievable. But all those small things that people like, whatever, to me, I was like, oh my God.
So we asked each of the folks we worked with on this exhibit to lend us a couple of artifacts and images to help tell their story. Anna lent us the coffee grinder and the coffee pot she talked about as something very meaningful she brought with her from Serbia. And one of the other stories, you know, we've come a long way, I think, in the United States, but prejudice is still something that's very much with us today, and immigrants still face it, and sometimes it comes from very surprising places. And I want to share one of the stories that Emil Haddad shared with us. And those of you who live and work in Elmhurst probably recognize the Haddad name. Emil and Jackie really did a lot in this community, and still do a lot. Their daughter, Jackie Tamer Haddad, is our city clerk, actually. And this story took place, begins on 9/11, actually.
There was a club that we belong to. It's a regular social club of Lebanese and Syrian Americans, and that club was a member of the Midwest Federation of American Syrian Lebanese Clubs. So we were automatically in that federation. So if you join the club, they have a convention, you go to it, you know, you hear the music, eat the food, socialize, and then eventually you end up being on a committee, then you move on up and so forth, and both of us served as president. And when 9/11 occurred, she got a phone call from the hotel, a Marriott in downtown Des Moines, that said, we're canceling your convention. And she said, well, what for? I have till I think the 21st of November, September, to sign the contract you sent me. And I'm ready to sign it and mail it. This was, 9/11. They said, no, we're canceling your convention. We got a bigger group, a better group than you. And I didn't buy it. but she did. She thought, well, if that's what they want to do. I said, no. I said, they don't do that stuff. I said, this morning, look what they did at the World Trade Center. You're sitting here in the morning crying, and I went to work because I figured that, I'd get out of the house and do some work, and then they closed our building downtown. So I came back in the afternoon, and I was there when the phone call came. And she couldn't believe it would happen. And so she asked my daughter, Jackie, call that hotel. It was like a week later, to see if they have space for a wedding on such and such a date next year. I forgot what dates they were, Jackie. And they told her, oh yeah, we got plenty of room. We had a big cancellation. We had plenty of room. So then we called the Justice Department, and they got in on it. This is Marriott. And they said, oh, we had a big group, and they were on a short list, and they asked for the name of the group. They called them, and nobody knew about it. So they settled with the Federation for $115,000. And we ended up at the convention in Troy, Michigan at a Marriott. So it worked out better for us.
I have to say that story was kind of a little bit of a gut punch for me when the first time I encountered it. But the Justice Department did the right thing and did right by them, I have to say. It's a pretty powerful story, but it's a reminder that a lot of our immigrants are still dealing with some deep-seated prejudices to this very day. I'm going to go back and just kind of finish up a couple pieces in the PowerPoint itself. And then if anybody has questions, you can queue them up either in the chat, and I'd be happy to address any of those. So let me continue on then. Oh, I am frozen. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So again, we were listening to Big Twee Lee's story. Coming here, since the Refugee Act of 1980 was passed, more than 4 million people have come to the United States due to racial, religious, social, or political persecution, warfare. Resettlement is something that is still ongoing, and this story has some real immediacy. Right before we opened the exhibit, we saw the war in Ukraine begin, and just before that happened, August of 2021, you saw the Taliban take over Afghanistan as well, precipitating some refugee crises here, and a number of our local organizations responded very strongly to that. Yorkfield Food Pantry certainly did, and here you've got some images, an image from the Islamic Foundation, my neighbors down the street in Villa Park, where my wife and I live, actually responding as well. We did also talk about undocumented immigrants and DACA in the exhibit as well. This is something that has been part of American history, undocumented immigrants, really from the very, very, very beginning. And it's something that's certainly a lightning rod for some people, and folks have very strong opinions about undocumented immigrants, but most will agree that education and even citizenship access should be available to undocumented minors brought here, many of whom have no touchstone whatsoever to their birth countries. It's interesting, though, when we think of undocumented immigrants, the focus is usually on border crossings, but actually a lot of our undocumented populations in this country are people who overstay visas. That increasingly accounts for a number of people who do not have legal permission to live here permanently, and it does carry the risk of deportation or a ban on re-entry as well. So we wanted to talk about that in the exhibit as well. And did address that and talked a little bit about the DACA program created in 2012, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. About 600,000 DACA recipients living in the United States today. There is not actually a path to citizenship, but there is a path to getting a driver's license and granted to some selected applicants, and still becomes a dramatic issue, especially in political years. Also, we want to take just a minute in the exhibit and talk about what it takes to become a citizen in the United States. Today, you go through the naturalization process. You basically have a permanent, if you're a permanent resident, that is, you have a green card and you're in the country for 5 years, are at least 18 years old and of good moral character, you can pass an English language test and a United States civics test to become a citizen, or if you marry a U.S. citizen, you can apply after 3 years. And we decided just for fun to actually put 10 questions from the citizenship test on a touchscreen in the exhibit, and you could try your hand. You basically are given a list of 100 questions. You're going to be asked 10 of them. It's an oral exam. It can be very, very tense. And you've got to get at least 6 of those 10 correct to pass the test. I can tell you that a recent survey conducted by the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship found that only 36% of us native-born people can actually pass that test, as opposed to 91% of immigrants. And I will tell you, as a guy who was a history major and a political science major both, I took the quiz thinking, well, I'm going to ace this, I'll get all 10. I got 9 out of 10. I got one wrong. It's tougher than you think. I'm going to tell you that right now. But we thought we wanted to have folks have a little bit of that experience as well. So again, I set up the story of this is Jose Meda and his family, owns Meda Motors and my car wash here in Elmhurst. I set up Jose's story a little bit. I set up Anna's story already. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is we asked the immigrants who were involved in creating this exhibit to loan us some images and some things they brought with them that they thought were particularly important. And this was an especially moving part of the exhibit, just because you would see, it could be everything from childhood books, a report card. You'd be surprised at how many of those came. Family photos, just a small family heirloom, an item of some religious significance, recipes often, cooking utensils or cookware, or traditional clothing for special occasions often make the list. And it really was just a very meaningful and emotional part of the exhibit. One of the themes that came out in the exhibit as well, in a lot of the interviews and the stories that are shared, is this push-pull between the desire to preserve one's customs and traditions from back home and to embrace this broader American culture that we see here in American traditions and expectations at the same time. And when I was growing up, I can still probably sing the one of the Saturday morning cartoon songs, Great American Melting Pot. We consider the United States to be a melting pot. And that really didn't quite come out in our interviews as the case. The best quote we got was from Elaine Thermopoulos, who said of American culture, it's more like a mosaic than a melting pot. I don't think it has to be a melting pot. I think the beauty of this is because we learn so much from other ethnic groups, and you gain so much more from living here because it is multi-ethnic. So every one of us with our own special shape and our own special color, part of that broader mosaic we call the United States. And that came out again and again. People would use other metaphors, but that came out. And a number of our interviewees talked about blending their cultural traditions with American customs and practices. So here you see Big Thuy with her husband, and they're wearing traditional Vietnamese clothing for their wedding ceremony. And later she changed into a more American-style dress, and he had a more American-style tuxedo. But it was an important part of their wedding ceremony. On the other side, Uzma Munir, who we interviewed, that's her and her family, and they're all dressed in traditional clothing for the celebration of Thanksgiving. Emil Haddad, who we interviewed, and you heard a bit from him earlier, would talk about Thanksgiving. Well, yeah, there'd be the turkey, but then all the really good Lebanese treats would be all around the turkey as well. In my family, that's lamb biryani, which makes its appearance every Thanksgiving, and which is really, really good, by the way. And one of my favorite stories that came out of here, too, if you see the doll in the middle of this particular image, this doll was created. Yasmina Blackburn, who lives in nearby Elk Grove, talked to Mattel about the American Girls doll series, and she loved the fact that they celebrated different backgrounds and different time periods even. But she said, we really need a good Muslim doll, and and she needs to be able to dress up for Eid al-Fitr, the breaking the fast for Ramadan. And at first, Mattel wasn't really interested, and then she pressed them on it, and they said, you know what, you're right, we need to do it, but we can't do it right if you're not involved. So she helped them design the outfit you're looking at on the doll, actually, which I just think is pretty spectacular. We shared again some of Emil Haddad's stories. So let's kind of conclude with looking to the future. So the exhibit ran from October 28th until May 15th. Our work's not done. Our collection is fuller. We're richer. We have more stories. We have more artifacts. We have more images than we did before. We've made great connections now, but our work continues. And so what we want to do going forward is to continue to capitalize on these connections we've made with a variety of wonderful cultural organizations here. We've already transitioned some of this exhibit into an outreach program that we take into classrooms now to explore the subject of immigration as well. And I would say that this is is a story that never ends. This is something that we continue and we do. And I think I've talked probably far longer than I should have. So let me turn it over for questions.
Let's see, we don't have any questions yet online. Folks online, feel free to put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and then I'll read aloud and Dave can answer. And then in audience participants, feel free also to ask a question if you have one.
I can say it sure was fun doing this because working on this exhibit and our team, I think, really did a tremendous job. We've made friendships and we've made partnerships that are going to just make the museum a better place. This was a real labor of love, and my hat's off to our team. They really work hard on this.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of thing where definitely it enriched the museum for the future too, and will weave its way through future exhibits.
Yeah, next year I got a state grant and we're going to be putting in a small public performance space on our property. And the idea of being able to do some concerts and storytelling events and things with some of these partners that we've built bridges with just excites me. And I think it's going to be a great step forward for the organization.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Let's see, I'll give it a couple more minutes just in case people are furiously typing on the other end. Let's see. What would you say were some of your favorite stories that maybe didn't make it into the presentation, like some of your favorite videos that you didn't share today?
Oh yeah, that's always a really tough thing because I tried to pick a few videos that were short and succinct, and you can do a quick little 3-minute loop and kind of crystallize and get that story. And some of the stories go on a little longer, but they're really interesting. One of the folks we interviewed, I think I mentioned her family, Uzma Manir. They all dressed up for Thanksgiving, wearing traditional clothing. It's a big deal. This is part of how they celebrate. And she really got into that push-pull relationship between, her culture and American culture, and not just Thanksgiving, but when she got married, you've got some of the traditions of, and my wife did this too, actually, wearing a Mangalsutra. It's a wedding necklace that's used in a lot of Indian ceremonies, actually. And it's as important as the wedding ring I'm wearing right now. And that became a part of her tradition and story. And also she would talk about growing up and being kind of self-conscious about, well, my food isn't like the food that the other kids are eating, and it smells different, and they kind of give me a rough time for it. And can't I just have a bologna sandwich? And that came out a lot again and again. And as she was saying those things, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can hear my wife's voice echoing in my ears because she talked about the same things growing up as well. But I will say, as she got older, embracing that and celebrating that tradition became very important to her as well. Yeah. So as you're speaking of, acceptance and bridging divides, and we have these different groups coming here. one of the other storylines that came out in the exhibit, and I should have had a picture of this. We had a case full of different sporting equipment and games, and that becomes one of the major bridges a lot of times as families come here. Well, the kids play with each other. They might tease each other too, but they play with each other. And sports are sports, and it's fun to play sports. And sometimes we introduce a new sport that nobody knew how to play before. And now we have things like, can you believe we have cricket leagues in Naperville, and we have them in Schaumburg, and ironically, cricket being a sport introduced to the United States in the 19th century that disappeared and now is actually making a comeback. But the whole idea of sports and using that as interconnectivity definitely is a storyline that came out again and again as well. All right, any other questions?
Looks like I still don't have any questions online, so I think we can call it. I want to thank everyone so much for coming. We are going to upload this video onto YouTube. I want to say the History Museum said we could have it up for quite a while, so you don't have to rush to watch it. So we'll send that up once we have that on our YouTube channel, and thanks to the History Museum for being generous enough to let us keep it up for a while. And I just want to thank everyone so much for coming, Dave and all the attendees.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.